Exonerated. Today I have with me two forensic scientists from the crime scene investigation team. Please welcome Abdullah Rashid and Youssef.
Hello, I'm really glad I'm here today and I hope I can help you learn more about friends.
Hello, I'm also really glad to be here with my partner Abdullah and Ahmed Hosney on this very special day.
Today we bring you the story of the Exonerated Roy Brown. On May 23, 1991, a crime was committed in upstate New York farmhouse. Firefighters were called to the scene of a burning home in Auburn, New York, which was later identified as the home of Sabina Kolakowski. Kolakowski's body was discovered just outside the burning farmhouse, apparently beaten and strangled before being stabbed to death. The victim was bitten numerous times all over her body. At the crime scene, police collected a bloody t-shirt and swabbed the bite marks for saliva. The first responders at the crime scene on the night of May 23 included Barry Bench, the brother-in-law of Kolakowski. The victim's body was found several hundred feet from the farmhouse, apparently dragged all the way there after she died. Most of the contents within the house were too damaged to collect as evidence. And so all that police had to go on was the victim's body and the evidence outside of the farmhouse. Even though Brown had nothing to do with the murder of Sabina Kolakowski, he was arrested and charged with Kolakowski's murder because he was convicted of abusing a co-worker of Kolakowski. Police officials told Brown that his bite mark pattern was a match to the bite marks found on Sabina Kolakowski's body. When this case went to trial, the defense called a local dentist without any formal training in bite mark analysis. His testimony was Brown's teeth did match the bite mark on the victim's body. Brown was found guilty. On January 23, 1992, he was sentenced to 25 years to life behind bars. Roy Brown was wrongfully convicted because of the misuse of bite mark evidence and prosecutors' actions. The evidence that placed Brown behind bars was provided by a local dentist. He was not board certified and did not have any formal training in bite mark analysis. At a later time, a qualified odontologist with appropriate qualifications in bite mark analysis looked into the case and excluded Brown as the perpetrator. However, even after hearing the results, the prosecution ignored this report and commissioned a report from the local dentist that indicated that Brown was the victim.
Yes, we are aware of Brown's case.
After spending 15 years in New York prisons for a murder he did not commit, Roy Brown was finally exonerated on March 5, 2007. Brown solved the crime himself in his prison cell. According to the Innocence Project, Brown became the 196th person nationwide and the 8th New York man exonerated through DNA evidence. On the day he became a free man, Roy Brown's plans were to play his guitar and chill out. Brown filed a lawsuit against the state of New York in May 2007, seeking $5 million in damages for his wrongful imprisonment. In 2009, 2 years after his release, New York State paid Brown $2.6 million for the 15 years he spent behind bars for a murder he did not commit. In 2003, Brown wrote to Bench telling him that DNA would implicate him when Brown finally got testing. The perpetrator, Barry Bench, committed suicide 5 days after he received the letter. Bench stepped in front of an Amtrak train and ended his life. So I was hoping both of you could tell us more about what happens behind the scenes and what techniques and processes you go through when analyzing DNA.
Sure, Abdullah will talk to us and explain more about this case.
Yes, definitely. Fortunately for us, we have dealt with this case in particular. I think that you did a very good job in summarizing Mr. Brown's case and exoneration story. Allow me to tell you the steps that were taken in order to exonerate Mr. Brown. As forensic scientists, we had to use DNA profiling in order to prove who the real murderer was in this case. Firstly, we gathered the 6 additional saliva stains that were found on the victim's shirt and brought them for testing. Secondly, we tested the DNA found at the crime scene, Sabina Kalakowski's DNA and Roy Brown's DNA. We then used gel electrophoresis to analyze the different DNA samples that we gathered. Fortunately, the gel electrophoresis results proved that the saliva on the shirt did not match Brown. As a means of finding the perpetrator, the DNA sample of Barry Bench's daughter was also obtained to be compared to the profile from the victim's journey. Finally, DNA testing revealed that Barry Bench was the source of the saliva on the shirt, as shown in the picture in front of you now. And as a means of further strengthening our evidence, Bench's body was exhumed for DNA testing, and from the gel electrophoresis, it proved that Barry Bench was the real perpetrator.
You mentioned gel electrophoresis. Could you please explain to us what that is?
Sure. As shown in the picture in front of you, I will further explain the process of gel electrophoresis. We measure strands of DNA using electrophoresis. The gel is the filter that sorts the DNA strands. DNA samples are placed in holes at one end of the gel using a pipette. We then use electrophoresis, which is how we push DNA strands through the gel filter. We remove the DNA strands by adding electrical current, and since DNA is negatively charged, it will move towards the positive side. Short strands move through the holes more quickly than long strands, meaning that over time, the short strands would have moved further away from the starting position than the long strands. DNA strands of the same length will end up together. Hence, DNA strands sort themselves out by lengths. Electrophoresis causes the DNA to sort themselves out by grouping together the different lengths of DNA strands. Finally, the gel electrophoresis shows bands of DNA, which can be used as results to match DNA profiles.
Wow, I didn't know about that. I also heard about two other terms in forensics. One was PCR and the other was STR. Could you please explain to us what that is too?
Of course. First off, I'll tell you a quick summary of DNA profiling process. We first isolate DNA samples from the crime scene and the suspects. However, in many cases, the DNA samples taken from the crime scene aren't enough, and so they need to be amplified. This is where PCR comes in. PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction, and it is the process of amplifying DNA as shown in the picture. It is used to make over 1 billion copies of DNA from just a few samples, and for that reason, great care is taken to prevent contamination with other biological materials during the identification of and collection of the preserved sample. PCR, the DNA samples go through numerous cycles. The first cycle yields 2 copies of DNA. The second cycle yields 4 copies of DNA, and the third one yields 8 copies of DNA, and so on and so forth. We then use the amplified DNA sample to analyze them through gel electrophoresis. On the other hand, STR stands for short tandem repeats, and it's just a term used for stretches of DNA that are repetitive. The following is an example that shows a stretch of DNA that has repetitive sequence. STRs are usually highly variable between different people that are unrelated in their length. These repeats occur at the same place in the genome. STR helps us in forensics if we need to isolate DNA based on pattern, for example, or we sometimes use PCR to amplify STRs, or sometimes even compare sizes of STRs using gel electrophoresis in order to match them in the DNA profile.
That's good to hear. If I recall correctly, DNA is used in forensics for various purposes. I know for a fact that used it in identifying potential suspects, identifying victims, establishing paternity and other family relations, detecting bacteria and other organisms that may pollute air, water, food, or soil, matching organ donors to recipients, and of course to exonerate the wrongfully convicted such as Roy Brown in our case. Tell me, I heard that the FBI developed a database of DNA profiles, am I right?
Yes, you are absolutely right. The FBI developed CODES in 1994, following the authorization of the DNA Identification Act. CODES stands for Combined DNA Index. It's the FBI's program of support for criminal justice DNA database. CODES was mainly created with the purpose of gathering the 13 different STR regions in people's DNA and storing them in one place. So it would be easier for forensic DNA analysts to compare and match the DNA sample found at the crime scene to the victim or suspect. CODES has multiple levels where DNA profiles can be stored and searched. The local level for city and country DNA laboratories, state level, and national level. Forensic analysts used CODES to search DNA profiles obtained from crime scene evidence against DNA profiles from other crime scenes and from convicted offenders can easily generate investigative leads in cases when a match is obtained, and therefore helping us with linking people who were involved in a crime scene. As of January 2014, CODES contained 12.5 million RST and criminal DNA profiles that have assisted in more than 224,800 investigations, which undoubtedly proves the success of CODES through the years.
However, there are risks involved in using CODES. As you stated, CODES is a database, and therefore making it hackable. A hacker might hack into a database and access the DNA profiles of all the people who have a record on CODES. They could also tamper with the DNA profiles on the database by changing some stuff or deleting some DNA profiles. Accessing a person's DNA profile doesn't just give you information about their criminal record, it also gives you information about their genes, traits, relatives, family members, and family relationships, and any personal biological information. Not only that, but this also violates a person's right to privacy because DNA profiles contain information about everything about you and not just your DNA fingerprint.
Definitely. There are risks involved in using CODES. And just like you said, some people might argue that this violates their right to privacy. But again, this is all done for the greater good and for the safety of our world. Nevertheless, we haven't had a problem until now with dealing with hackers. And up until now, CODES has been very successful and has proved to be such a valuable and useful resource to have when investigating crimes.
Well, yes, you're right. This ends our episode today, and I hope you guys learned something from what you just heard. Now you consume a lot of knowledge about DNA forensics and understand the story of Roy Brown. After all of the obstacles Brown had to face, he continues to live his life as a different individual. Brown says that he'll never feel completely comfortable after his life in prison. Too much has changed. The case is now closed, and Roy Brown can live his life as a free man. I would lastly like to thank you both today for joining me here and helping us understand more about what goes on behind the scenes.
You're welcome, Ahmed.
Anytime. It's good to teach people about what goes behind the scenes so that they know we are not joking around and that we will find them if they commit a